Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are jumping into a really profound address from 1976.
Hmm.
It lays out this radical framework for understanding, well, everything.
Mm.
History, suffering, personal responsibility.
And it all hangs on one very specific concept that you have to get right from the start.
Indemnity.
Indemnity, exactly. And in this context, it's not just about money. It's the payment or the condition you have to set to completely fix a mistake.
Any mistake.
Any mistake, a big historical wrong, a sin. It's the mechanism the sources claim binds all of history together.
Okay, so that's our mission today. We're going to unpack this system that sees all of human history from the human fall right up to the Cold War.
All of it.
All through this lens of unpaid debts. You need to get into the logic, the roles of Cain and Abel, and why this framework seems to insist that suffering is actually a necessary part of the process.
Well, the beauty of it is how it scales. The principle is the same, whether it's big or small.
Right. The sources start with an analogy from everyday life.
Yeah, like in a marriage or between friends. If there's a mistake, some anger, and you just bury it.
You don't apologize. You don't do anything to make it right.
It doesn't just vanish. It multiplies. It becomes resentment. It stays there like an unpaid debt that demands to be resolved later.
So you can't just ignore a problem and move forward. The source says you have to pull it out, look at the root of it, and actively compensate for it.
And that same logic just escalates right up to the cosmic level, to the original human mistake, the fall.
Because humanity committed this foundational crime against God, all the sin that came after just piled up on top of it.
Exactly. So to solve the root of the problem, not just the symptoms you see today, you have to expose that original mistake. You can't just cover it up.
And this restoration, or what the source calls the dispensation, it requires paying indemnity.
But the scale is just, well, it's staggering. It started with an individual mistake, but then it grew.
Into wrongs done by families, tribes, whole nations.
Throughout all of history. So if you want to get mankind back to that original unfallen state.
You have to pay for all of it. Every accumulated wrong.
Which leads to this central question the source poses.
What would God think?
What would God think of the one person who stands up and offers to compensate for all of it? Individual, family, tribal, national, worldwide, everything.
He'd have to place his ultimate hope in that person.
He'd have to. Because the other key idea here is that God can't just, snap his fingers and start over. He's bound by principle.
So he has to work through people to restore creation.
Right. So that one person who takes on that universal burden, they become the absolute linchpin for all of history.
And that brings us right to this figure who has to carry that massive burden, the archetype of Abel.
Abel is defined as the guide, the one on God's side, and Cain is the opposition, on Satan's side.
And the sources are very clear. There has to be one central Abel figure.
One person who takes responsibility for the whole world, and, this is critical, you can't just claim that position for yourself.
No, it's not about ambition.
Not at all. God decides first, and then it has to be validated by people who, understand the details of this whole restoration process. The bar is incredibly high.
Okay, and here's the part that is really counterintuitive. To qualify as Abel, this person has to be recognized by 4 different parties.
Right. First, God. That makes sense.
Then, good ancestors in the spirit world and the angelic world.
And then the fourth one,
Satan.
Satan himself. Which is just a radical idea.
He's not just an enemy. He's given an official role.
The prosecutor. In the court of heaven, he is the prosecutor. And if Satan can point to any fault, any unpaid debt in that person's lineage or life,
God can't just overrule him.
No, God is the judge. If the prosecutor proves there's still a debt, the judge can't just acquit the defendant. The principle has to be absolute.
So how does this person ever get past that? The defense comes from good spirits and angels. But ultimately,
the individual has to remove the grounds for accusation completely. Meaning they have to become so obedient to God, so one with God, that they're basically standing in God's position relative to Satan.
Because Satan has no grounds to accuse God, only man.
Exactly. It's a mechanism that gives Satan a kind of cosmic veto power, which ensures that when the victory finally happens, it's legally airtight. Forever.
Okay, so if you connect that idea, you have to satisfy Satan's prosecution. It starts to make sense why so many historical heroes live these abnormal lives.
Yes, the human fall messed things up so badly that God had to start working outside of what we'd call common sense.
To create these necessary conditions for indemnity.
And that's why these figures who were supposed to bring restoration just face so much misery and these seemingly irrational tests.
I mean, look at the first Abel. He was killed.
He was, and his death delayed everything for centuries, but, and this is the key, because he was fully invested, he spiritually cleared a path for the next Abel to get help.
The logic is really clear with Noah, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The command to build an ark on a dry mountain, it sounds insane.
For 120 years. Why so long?
The source says it was purely to remove Satan's accusation. Satan was basically sitting there with a stopwatch,
Calculating how long Noah could possibly last at this ridiculous task before he complained or gave up.
right? Satan probably figured, what, a few decades, tops? So God, knowing that, commanded 120 years.
An exorbitant requirement.
It wasn't just about the boat, it was the duration of his faith. It forced Satan to just run out of arguments and surrender his claim on Noah.
And you see that pattern again with Abraham and Moses.
God tells Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, his only son, born when he was 100. It completely contradicts the promise that he'd be the father of a great nation.
Yet his obedience paid a huge indemnity. And Moses, he was a murderer, but God chose him after he'd spent 40 years in the wilderness.
And the key part of those 40 years, the source stresses, is his attitude. He was never resentful. He was always praising God.
So that unresentful service paid the price for what he did before.
It qualified him. And this whole indemnity course is the lens the source uses to explain why good people and good groups have suffered so much.
The Israelites were scattered because they failed their mission.
And Christians went through brutal persecution under the Roman Empire for similar reasons. They failed to meet certain requirements.
So every failure just prolongs the whole course and forces it to be restarted, often with good people being martyred to pay for it.
And that historical pattern of a chosen group failing and prolonging the course, that brings us right up to 1976.
Right. The address basically says that because Christianity didn't cooperate with the figure identified as the Lord of the Second Advent,
A new movement had to come forward.
the Unification Church, to go through this worldwide persecution and pay that final indemnity course.
And that failure had a real impact on the timeline. The source is very specific about this.
He claims that if Christianity had cooperated, the goal could have been reached in just 7 years.
But instead, because of that lack of cooperation, it got stretched out to 21 years.
So the central leader had to basically condense 2,000 years of Christian history into a 21-year period of intense, concentrated indemnity.
And this is then mapped onto the geopolitics of the time. The sources see Korea and America as corresponding to Israel and the Roman Empire.
And Korea is described as the absolute front line, the battleground between God and Satan, a nation totally split in two, with no contact between North and South.
Right. And this context is key to understanding the political commentary in the speech.
We should be clear here, we're just reporting what the source material states.
Exactly. The address is very critical of the American media.
For how it portrayed the South Korean president at the time, Park, it says that while Americans called him a dictator, the source notes that he had never murdered or killed anyone.
And then it draws this really stark contrast. It says that while criticizing Park, Americans were sometimes viewing figures like Mao Zedong,
Who the source credits with 150 million deaths.
or Kim Il-sung with 3 million, or Stalin with 70 million, sometimes seeing someone like Mao as a hero.
So the author is using these huge numbers to argue that the West just didn't get the stakes of the fight on that front line.
That's the viewpoint, yeah. So after this period of intense payment, the movement declares a day of heavenly victory on October 4th.
Shifting to the offense.
Permanently. And the plans from that point on are just massive. Wiping out communism, starting a university and newspaper, taking back media and the arts for God's side, basically building a new world. And that shift is really the whole point.
Yeah.
Moving from a time of, abnormality and
A
persecution.
time of normalcy.
Right. Expecting things to go smoother, for material blessings to come after that third 7-year course was done.
Which required this one last critical transfer of responsibility.
Yes. Up to this point, the leader, the Abel figure, has paid almost all the indemnity. He carried that historical cross.
But now the focus shifts completely to the members.
The Cain-type figures, now they have to lay their own foundation. They have to focus on their own indemnity, individual, family, tribal, and so on.
And the address gives them a hard deadline for this.
A very specific one. The remaining 3.5 years of that condensed course. They were told to invest everything in that period.
The reasoning being that they had to build their own foundation so the leader could stop worrying about them and focus on the worldwide level.
And here's the payoff, the promise. If the followers, the Cain figures, hold up their end and pay this final indemnity,
They inherit everything.
all the spiritual wealth that the leader won, and the source emphasizes they get it without having to go through that same brutal original indemnity course themselves.
And crucially, without any accusation from Satan about their standing.
And if they win, the sources see total victory. The communist world crumbles, the power of evil just diminishes, young people turn away from drugs and immorality.
And the spirit world and the physical world finally unite. The conclusion of history. I mean, it is just a staggering framework to analyze. The idea that one person has to compensate for all of human sin in this incredibly condensed time period.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is what it says about God's position in all this. That even God has to follow this strict principle of indemnity. That he's forced to make these abnormal, almost cruel-seeming demands on his best people.
Noah for 120 years, Moses for 40.
All to satisfy the legal requirements of this cosmic prosecutor, Satan.
So we'll leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. The source material suggests that one group's failure can delay history for centuries. So if you were there in 1976 and you're told this is the best chance of your whole life, what does it mean for you to be involved in a mission to complete all of historical compensation, not just for yourself, but for your descendants, so you can secure an inheritance that's based entirely on someone else's ultimate victory? Something to mull over as you process the monumental scale of this framework.